U.S. Colonel Matt Dimick. He's the former director for Russia at the National Security Council. We're also joined by the executive director of the McCain Institute, Evelyn Farkas. She's the former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Russia, Ukraine, and Eurasia. Matt, let me start with you. The Kremlin put out video tonight of Putin surrounded by cheering admirers. How does this fit into Putin's attempts to try to regain control of this situation?
Yeah, Putin really needs to demonstrate that he's firmly in control of his seat, and he is so unconcerned about what's going on that he's willing to go about mundane tasks like traveling to Dagestan to talk about domestic tourism and the local brandy industry. So this is something that I think makes sense for Putin to do. He wants to show that he's got firm control of the seat and everything is business as usual, and he's just going about his job.
Evelyn, Putin says he did not doubt the support of the Russian people during the rebellion. What do you make of Putin's spin on all of this?
Yeah, I mean, Wolf, I think you have to juxtapose the two images. So today he's in Dagestan, people are cheering him on. Who knows how that came about? Was it instigated or actually staged by his people? And flash back to Saturday, there weren't crowds in the streets, holding signs with, Putin, we love Putin. In fact, the crowds were around Prigozhin in Rostov-on-Don. So, I think that Putin's trying to show that he's popular, but I think it's going to take more to convince the outside world and maybe even the Russian people.
I think you're right. Matt, this failed mutiny has to increase Putin's paranoia. But does he have to tread carefully right now in any attempt at a crackdown or cleaning house or anything along those lines?
He sure does. He's going to be very suspicious about who exactly knew what Prigozhin was up to and who was either willingly complicit or knew what was going on and was sympathetic to it. So there's going to be a lot of questioning going on. Putin's not really sure maybe who to trust. And if he does start to clean house, that will create its own web of instability as he goes about purging senior members of some of these ministries and causing its own level of chaos. So he certainly has to tread carefully and pick his way through this.
Definitely. Evelyn, I'm anxious to get your thoughts. Is Putin constrained in how he handles Yevgeny Prigozhin, the Wagner leader, at this point?
I think he is, Wolf. Again, adding on to what Matt just said, Putin is the kind of guy who definitely would want to clamp down right now to show that he's in control and to seek retribution. There was a lot of anger in his voice the first time he got in front of the people to talk about Prigozhin and the traitors. And I'm sure that anger has not subsided. If anything, it's grown. But the problem, the bind that he's in, as you referred to it, is the fact that Prigozhin is on the nationalist side, and he's got a lot of support from more hardline nationalists than maybe Putin himself, but certainly hardline nationalists. And he has probably the tacit support of the Russian people because he was standing up, speaking for their sons and their fathers and their husbands in the battlefield. So how he navigates this will be tricky for him.
Very tricky indeed. Matt, Putin, as we know, relies on the Wagner mercenary group for all sorts of activities around the world, in Africa, in the Middle East, elsewhere. So how does he handle all of that while trying to sideline Prigozhin?
Yeah, I think he's going to go about dismantling Wagner as it exists in Ukraine and in Russia. I think that group as an entity is pretty much dead. It might reemerge under new management, under a new label, but they're certainly going to want Wagner or a similar organization, whatever it's renamed or rebranded, to continue its activities in Africa and in the Middle East and pursuing Russian political goals in those areas.
Retired Colonel Matt Dimick, thanks very much for joining us. Evelyn Farkas, thanks to you as well. Just ahead.